Today, we're jumping right into a really charged topic, the intersection of faith and politics in America. We're going to look at how anti-Muslim rhetoric has been topping up all over the public square lately, everywhere from street-level protests all the way to high-stakes elections. Okay, so take a look at these two statements. On one side, you've got this call for an American crusade, and on the other, a message about hospitality. Now, here's the kicker. Both of these quotes came from the exact same person. So, how in the world does that happen? What could cause such a complete 180? Well, that journey, that's right at the heart of our first story. So let's head to Dearborn, Michigan. Now, Dearborn is home to one of the largest Muslim populations in the entire country. And because of that, it's unfortunately become something of a magnet for anti-Islam activists who are, looking to stir up some controversy and, frankly, get some clicks. Just recently, you had far-right influencers like Jake Lang, who you might remember was involved in the January 6th Capitol riot, show up in Dearborn. And they had a really clear goal: provoke a reaction, get it on camera, and post it online. Lang tried to burn a Quran, but counter-protesters actually stepped in. So what did he do next? He was seen slapping the holy book with a slab of bacon. Just pure provocation. And this kind of rhetoric didn't just stay on the fringes or online. It jumped right into the formal political arena. That's when Anthony Hudson, who was running for governor at the time, announced his own big protest. And he called it an American crusade, his words, to fight against what he called Muslim infiltration and Sharia law. But then, before his big protest was supposed to happen, Hudson did something pretty unexpected. He actually decided to visit the community he was planning to protest against. He went to 3 different local mosques in the Dearborn area. And after he actually sat down, spoke with people, and saw their hospitality for himself, he publicly called the whole crusade off. He even admitted that the stuff he'd been hearing was just plain false and misleading. Okay, so that's the story from the streets of Michigan. Now, let's switch gears and head to the high-stakes political world of New York City. Because we're about to see a really similar playbook at work, using faith as a weapon. Only this time, it's happening in a huge mayoral race. And you have to understand, this campaign wasn't happening in a vacuum. Not at all. According to the city's own data, New York saw get this, a staggering 69% increase in anti-Muslim hate crimes in just 1 year. That creates a really tense, really scary, real-world backdrop for an election. It just goes to show how political talk can reflect and maybe even fuel a pretty dangerous reality on the ground. So how did this play out? It was almost like a step-by-step playbook. First, Zohran Mamdani, who's a Muslim candidate for mayor, gets photographed with a prominent imam. Step 2, opponents, including some big national names, immediately start labeling him terror-linked online. Then, things get even worse. A radio host makes this absolutely outrageous suggestion that Mamdani would somehow celebrate another 9/11. And the most shocking part? His opponent, Andrew Cuomo, was right there on the show, and he just chuckled, didn't push back at all. And that silence, it gives a kind of legitimacy to a really dangerous. So how did Mamdani respond to all this? Well, he shared this really powerful reflection. He didn't just talk about the political attacks. He brought it down to the lived, day-to-day reality for so many Muslims in the city. He told the story of his aunt, who literally stopped taking the subway after September 11th because she just didn't feel safe wearing her hijab. It was a way to connect all that high-level political rhetoric to real, everyday fear. All right, let's pivot again, this time down to Texas. Because here, we see the conflict escalate even further. It moves beyond campaign attacks and becomes an official government action. And it's targeting one of the biggest Muslim civil rights groups in the country. This is where we see rhetoric turn into actual policy. Okay, so to really get what happened next, we need to understand a key term: Foreign Terrorist Organization, or FTO. Now, designating a group as an FTO, that's a huge deal. It's a federal power, and it's not taken lightly. The decision has to be made at the very top levels of the U.S. government. We're talking the Secretary of State, the Attorney General, and the Treasury Secretary. What it's not is a power that some state governor just has. So even with that clear legal line in the sand, Texas Governor Greg Abbott went ahead and issued an official proclamation doing, well, exactly that. He declared the Council on American Islamic Relations, or CAIR, a foreign terrorist organization. And legal experts immediately jumped on this saying, whoa, hold on, that is way outside your authority. CAIR's response was, as you can imagine, swift and very direct. They basically said the governor was using this proclamation as a political weapon. Their argument was that he was just trying to stoke anti-Muslim hysteria and silence a prominent American Muslim group that has been critical of the Israeli government's policies. But they didn't just put out a press release and call it a day.
Oh no, CARE took this fight to the next level. They filed a federal lawsuit against the state of Texas. Their argument is pretty straightforward. The governor's order isn't just a massive overreach of power, it's a direct violation of their constitutional rights. We're talking First Amendment rights and due process.
So after all this confrontation, we've seen it on the streets, in elections, and now in the courts. How did it all shake out? What were the results? Let's take a look at the outcomes.
Well, back in New York, the attacks just didn't work. Zohran Mamdani actually won the election. He became the city's first Muslim mayor. It was a pretty clear message that voters rejected that whole fear-based campaign and instead chose the very candidate who was being targeted.
And what about in Dearborn? Well, the story of Anthony Hudson, the guy who planned the crusade, also came to a resolution. The local CAR chapter formally acknowledged his change of heart. They put out a statement welcoming his remorse and even publicly invited him to keep the conversation going, to learn more about the community he almost protested against.
So after looking at these three stories, which seem different but are really connected, what are the big takeaways here?
Okay, first big thing. This stuff isn't just talk. The rhetoric has real, tangible consequences. Remember that 69% spike in hate crimes? Yeah. Second, pushing back actually matters. We saw how legal challenges in Texas and community organizing in New York were powerful tools. Third, this is not an isolated problem. It's a tactic that's being used at basically every level of our public life, from local protests to state government. But here's the fourth point, and it's kind of the hopeful one from the Dearborn story. Direct, personal engagement. It can actually change minds. And finally, when you put it all together, it's pretty clear that this fundamental debate over who really belongs, who gets to be a full participant in American life, well, that fight is a long way from being over. And all of this really leaves us with one final, and I think really crucial question. When public discourse, when our words and ideas become weapons, who's responsible for disarming them? Is it just the politicians who use them, the media that reports on them, or does some of that responsibility fall on all of us?